Hey everybody, it's just after 9 o'clock in the morning, and my youngest and I just walked up the hill here to the cemetery, and I know her. Hey everybody, KMO here, just after 9 o'clock in the morning, and my son and I just climbed the steep hill up here to the cemetery, right after watching the 9th and final episode of Snowpiercer, the TV series. And it's produced by, among other people, Bong Joon-ho, who directed the film Snowpiercer. So in the film, there's just three categories of people: first class, steerage, and the unauthorized, the stowaways in the tail. In the TV show, it's more complex. You've got first class, second class. People in second class are living pretty well. Third class is rough, and that's where all the people who actually run the train live. And then in the back, you have the stowaways in the tail who live in the cold and in the dark with not much water and, the same sort of food they were eating in the film. And this is more interesting because the people in third are absolutely necessary to run the train, but they're kept in line by fear of being sent back to the tail. But third class and the tail together make up 70% of the population of the train. And yet people up in first have lots of space, more than they need to eat, lots of luxury, and people in second, as I say, are living pretty well as well. If you were to make everything equal and make everybody live the same way, this is a point they come back to repeatedly in the TV show, is that we don't know exactly what the standard of living would be, but it would probably be better than third. First and second together are only 30% of the population, but they're taking up the vast bulk of the resources on the train. Or resources for my fellow Americans. That's just the setup. In the film, it's just a straightforward revolution. There's a fight. The minions of the rich people fight the poor people from the back of the train all the way to the front. People die all along the way, and in the end, big spoiler alert for a film that's several years old now, the train derails and everybody, it seems like they're going to die, but a couple of people get off the train and they see in the distance there's a polar bear. So not all life is gone from the earth, although it seems extremely unlikely that people who have just been sitting on a train and not having to do anything for their survival, for the past several years are now going to, in this, glacial mountain pass, going to make a life for themselves, hunting polar bears. I don't know. What are the polar bears eating, though? Anyway, the series is more interesting. And again, some spoilers. I'll try to keep the spoilers to a minimum, but one spoiler you learn of in the very first episode is there is no Mr. Wilford. It's Mr. Wilford's train, but really there's a woman named Melanie Cavill who's the head of hospitality, but really she designed the train, she knows everything about the train, she's running the train, it's her baby. What happened to Mr. Wilford? For most of the series we don't know. But instead of it just being a revolution and a fight from the back to the front, there's a murder. And one of the guys in the tail, the main character, a guy named Leighton, is a former homicide detective, and he gets pulled out of the tail to come up and investigate the mystery, of who the murderer is. And he finds out, but in the process he finds out too much. And anyway, wackiness ensues. It's a really marvelous film, and it's really amazing that it got made right now, because it really subverts the paradigm of, society in a capitalist system with oligarchs being this perfect meritocracy where anybody can work up to that oligarch level if they're just smart and diligent enough. And, the train depends on people whose labor is coerced. They are skilled, but there is no possibility for advancement. There is nowhere up for them to go. They're not going to go to first. They're not going to go to second, although one person does go to second, not because she's, such an excellent, diligent worker and so smart, but because somebody in second wants to have sex with her. But in the TV show, we get to move all over the train. We get to see how various people live, how they interact, who depends on who, but more importantly, who thinks they are indispensable. And of course, who thinks they're indispensable? The first-class passengers, who don't do anything. But they put up the money to build the train. They funded the whole thing, and so they think that they get to live in luxury in perpetuity because they had the money. Money which is worthless now that the entire economy is crashed, now that there is no cash economy. So the final episode, it aired yesterday, but since I buy them on Amazon, I have to wait a day. because I'm not a first-class viewer. I guess I'm a second-class viewer. But I did pay for it. I didn't pirate it. So I am second class, or maybe third class. I don't know. It's not an exact analogy. But I was kind of hoping that this would be a one season, here's the big narrative, and it ends conclusively. And right up until the last minute, it seemed like it might. Although, as we got closer and closer to the very end, it seemed that any final resolution would be pretty unsatisfying and a kind of a downer. But they've set us up for a second season, and so it goes. I'm happy about that. I mean, I'll certainly watch it. I was riveted in this final episode. I mean, I was on the edge of my seat. I was talking to the screen. I was advising the characters. So, there's going to be a second season. I will watch. But I was really hoping that they would, just tell a complete story and be done with it. Why? Because even great shows, if every single season is just the setup for the next season, eventually they hit a stale spot and things just, they unravel. Like so many shows. The one that comes to mind is The Walking Dead. But last night, we also watched The Old Guard with, what's her name? Charlize Theron, who is great in action roles, even when the movies aren't great. And I went into it with really low expectations because a YouTube movie reviewer whose opinion I normally agree with, Chris Stuckman, he gave it a meh rating. And he said that it was sort of in the John Wick action genre, but it didn't live up to John Wick in terms of the sophistication of the fight choreography and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, so what? I watched the first John Wick. It was amazing. I watched the second one. It was just more of the first one. I didn't bother with the third. I mean, the story is kind of irrelevant. It's basically there is a walking death machine who has retired from dealing death. He wants to live a normal life, and bad people drag him back in, and they give him an excuse to deal death some more, and he does for the length of a film. It was so well done the first time that I went and watched the second one. The second one was really well done, but it doesn't give me anything in terms of emotion or story to bring me back. Nothing about the end of the first one or the second one had me wondering what happens next. So as much as I've enjoyed Snowpiercer, I would like a complete story told, finished. Here's a done product. It's not a movie. It's a 9-hour miniseries. But so it goes. So, The Old Guard. Chris Stuckman said that, we had these sort of half-baked interactions between characters, which just sort of filled time between the not quite John Wick level action scenes. And yeah, you could see it that way, but for me, I was more interested in the story about people who never die. Immortal people. Charlize Theron was great, as always. I thought the whole cast was great. The villain, the ultimate villain, I mean, there's one guy, I can't pronounce his name, but he was the 12 Years a Slave guy. He played a character in one of the Marvel films as well. But in the beginning, it seems like he might be a villain, and it turns out he's working for the villain. But really, he is he's doing something bigger, something more important to the story, and we don't really find out what that is until near the end. The actual villain, though, is a pharmaceutical billionaire CEO guy who is completely... I mean, he's beyond amoral. I think he's drifted into just cartoonish evil. And he was probably the weakest element in the film, but he's not in it much. And, his greed and his amorality sort of drive the plot. But more importantly, at the beginning, here's this group of immortals. There's 4 of them at the start. And they are, they've been soldiers for centuries. They really understand how to operate as a team. They are expert killers. There's sort of 4 John Wicks trying to improve the world. And the main, the leader, the Charlize Theron character, she's thinking, we keep fighting for what we think is right, and the world just keeps getting worse. It's like what we do has no effect. We're just, we're losing ground. There's no point in continuing. And yet the 12 Years a Slave guy, he is watching them from a distance. He is doing historical research, tracking, where they've gone, who they've helped, and what the person they helped did, or what their kids or grandkids did. And he can see a larger pattern, which I think is really important, because even those of us, and when I say us, I mean just humans. I don't overestimate, I don't think, my own contribution to anything. But, those humans who are really doing the most good, who are struggling, may not be able to see it. And I thought that was a really interesting message in the film. And, a film like this doesn't even need to have a message. Another criticism Chris Stuckman had of it was that the rules for being an immortal aren't really clearly defined. They're not really spelled out and adhered to. And that's because the immortals themselves don't know the rules. They don't know why they live forever. They don't know why they heal. And they don't know why sometimes some of them stop healing and die. And, there's no reason why they would know. I mean, when you're talking about immortal warriors fighting for a better world, it's kind of hard not to think about Highlander. And the thing that was kind of implausible about Highlander is that all the immortals somehow knew what was going to happen. They knew there would be this, ultimate contest far in the future and only one could survive. There can be only one, said Christopher Lambert. How do they know? They just know, in the context of the film, which is fine. It was the premise for that action film. But here we are decades later revisiting that premise, and it requires a bit more thought and a bit more nuance, and the characters ultimately not understanding why they're immortal, what they're supposed to do, and just dealing with the world as it is presented to them. It's ambiguous. There aren't clear rules that can be conveyed to the audience, in an info dump. But that's life. Life is ambiguous. Our purpose is ambiguous. The results of our actions are ambiguous. And to some extent, we just have to pick a purpose and we have to pick a set of moral commitments and adhere to them as best we can. Hey, a message. I'll end on a message. Talk to you later.